The smoke rose before the men understood what they were looking at. 11 ships, burning or sinking, depending on which soldier you asked, and none of them agreed because none of them had been told this would happen. This is the story of Hernán Cortés and the 600 men who followed him onto a beach in 1519 with no way home. It started 3 weeks earlier when the ships first came into view of the coastline of what is now Mexico. Cortés stood at the bow, watching the shore. He was 34 years old. He had talked his way into this command, borrowed money he did not have to fund it, and defied a direct order from the governor of Cuba to turn back before he ever set sail. He was, by any honest measure, already in trouble before the first man stepped onto the sand. But he had heard the stories. Gold, cities larger than anything in Spain, an empire inland, ruled by a man named Moctezuma that no European had ever seen with his own eyes. The men who followed him were not soldiers in the way we imagine soldiers. They were farmers' sons, debt runners, men who had failed at something else first. Some had come for gold. Some had come because Cuba offered them nothing. A few had come simply because the ship was leaving, and staying behind felt worse than the unknown. They landed near a place they would later call Veracruz, and almost immediately the whispering began. This is too far. This is too much. We should go back. It is easy, from a distance of 500 years, to imagine conquest as something inevitable, something that simply happened, because it was written to happen. It was not. At every stage, men were afraid. At every stage, some of them wanted to leave. A faction among the officers, loyal to the Governor Cortés had defied, began organizing quietly. They intended to seize a ship in the night and sail back to Cuba, reporting Cortés as a mutineer before he could report anything himself. Cortés found out. He could have punished them. He could have posted guards, doubled the watch, tried the ringleaders, and hoped fear would hold the rest in line. Instead, he did something stranger. He gave the order to destroy the fleet. Historians still argue over exactly how it was done. Some accounts say the ships were run aground and burned on the beach in front of the men, deliberately, so every soldier could watch the flames with his own eyes. Others say Cortés was quieter about it than legend remembers, and had the ships scuttled below the waterline, holes bored into the hulls at night, so that they simply would not float when morning came. No fire, no spectacle, just a slow certainty settling over the camp. Either way, the result was the same. When the sun rose, there was no fleet. Imagine standing on that beach. You did not choose this expedition. You followed a leader you were not sure you trusted, to a coastline you had never seen, hunting a city you were not sure existed. And now you turn around, looking for the one thing that could still take you home. And it is gone. Cortés gathered the men and told them plainly why he had done it. There is nowhere behind you now, he said. There is only forward to Tenochtitlan, or nowhere at all. Some men wept. Some men were furious. A few, it said, considered killing him for it. But something else happened too. Something Cortés seemed to have understood before he ever gave the order. Within days, the arguing stopped. The factions dissolved. Men who had been half planning an escape only a week before began asking instead what the march inland would require. Not because they had suddenly grown brave, because the question of whether to go had simply stopped being a question at all. They marched inland, through mountain passes, through territory controlled by peoples who had never heard of Spain and had no reason to welcome 600 armed strangers. They fought. They negotiated. They allied with rival kingdoms who had their own grievances against the Aztec Empire. Grievances Cortés was shrewd enough to exploit at every turn. And months later, they walked into Tenochtitlan, one of the largest cities on earth at the time. Built on a lake, connected by causeways, home to 250,000 people. None of what followed was simple, and none of it was clean. The conquest that Cortes set in motion would bring violence, disease, and the collapse of an empire, consequences that stretched far beyond anything decided on that beach. That is a larger story, and a harder one, and it deserves to be told with its full weight. But the beach itself, the specific choice made in that single morning, has outlived almost everything else about the expedition. It has been retold so many times, in so many contexts, that have nothing to do with Mexico or the 16th century, that it has become something closer to a parable than a historical record. Which raises a question worth sitting with. What is it about burning your own ships that people cannot stop repeating 500 years later in boardrooms and gyms and living rooms that have nothing to do with conquest at all? Strip away the coastline, the century, the empire waiting inland, and what you are left with is a much smaller idea. Sometimes the fastest way to stop debating a decision is to remove the option of reversing it. That is not a story about courage. Not really. It is a story about architecture. Cortés did not make his men braver. He changed what was physically possible for them to do. The debate had been eating the expedition alive for weeks, not because the men lacked will, but because retreat was always sitting there, available, a door left open in the back of every mind. As long as that door stayed open, some fraction of their attention was always calculating how to reach it. Burning the ships did not add courage. It deleted the alternative, and without the alternative, there was nothing left to calculate. The historian Hugh Thomas, who spent years reconstructing the conquest of Mexico from Spanish and indigenous sources alike, has written about how thin the line was at that moment, how easily the expedition could have collapsed into mutiny before it ever reached the interior. The outcome was not obvious in advance. It became obvious only after the ships were gone, which is precisely the point. Certainty, in this story, was manufactured. It did not arrive on its own. There is a name for what Cortés did, though he certainly never used it. The economist Thomas Schelling, writing centuries later on strategy and conflict, called this a commitment device, a deliberate, sometimes irreversible action, taken specifically to remove your own future ability to back out. Schelling's insight was that limiting your own options can be a source of strength rather than weakness, because other people, and sometimes your own wavering mind, will only take your resolve seriously once retreat is no longer available to you. A negotiator who visibly cannot back down negotiates from a stronger position than one who can. A general with no ships fights differently than a general who could still sail home. It's worth noting, too, that the neatness of this story is itself a little suspicious. Some historians, including Matthew Ristall, have pointed out that the burned ships version may be more legend than record, that Cortés likely had the vessels quietly run aground and stripped rather than set dramatically ablaze in front of a crowd. The fire may be a detail added later by people retelling the story who understood instinctively that a quiet scuttling in the dark doesn't move an audience the way flames do. Which is its own kind of lesson. We don't just repeat this story because it's true. We repeat it because it explains something we recognize. Because most people never burn a single ship. Most people do something smaller and slower and far more common. They keep the ship in the harbor, just in case. They stay in the job that no longer fits, because leaving it feels riskier than the quiet unhappiness of staying. They keep the relationship that is already ended in every way but the paperwork. They start the diet, the business, the manuscript, but they leave themselves an exit, an easy way to say it didn't count, and then they wonder, months later, why they never really committed. This is not a call to burn every ship in your life without thought. Cortés's decision worked because he had already scouted the terrain, secured alliances, and understood what lay ahead better than his men did. Recklessness dressed up as commitment is still recklessness. The lesson is narrower than that, and more useful for it. It is that some decisions are never actually finished being made until the alternative is gone. Not the decision to try, the decision to stop being able to quit. Think about the last time you truly committed to something, and ask yourself honestly what changed the moment you removed your own way out. Maybe it was telling people publicly before you were ready, so backing out would cost you something. Maybe it was quitting the old job before the new plan was fully proven, so there was no safety net left to catch the old, comfortable version of you. Maybe it was something as small as deleting an app, a distraction, a door you kept leaving open just in case, until you finally closed it and found the question underneath. It had quietly stopped being a question at all. The men on that beach did not become different people overnight. They simply lost the ability to keep asking whether to go. The morale of the story is, certainty is rarely found before a decision. It's built after, by removing every way of escaping it.